Hello, Frizzle Forum. I'm going to be reviewing for you the last 10 books I read. Typically, I rank these, but I think today we're going to experiment with just telling you about them in the order that I read them. But I'd love to get feedback from you, so let me know in the comments. Do you prefer the wrap-up that goes in chronological order as I read them, or ranking them based on how much I loved them? Well, today, let's start with the first of these books that I read, which is the first 3 books in the Guild Codex Warped series. If you remember from my last wrap-up, I was talking about other series in this interconnected universe, the Guild Codex universe. I have loved a lot of books in these series, but I think overall, this series is my favorite so far. No, I haven't given any of the books 5 stars, but it's the series that I see most potential with. This series is following a man named 𝐂𝐀. He has a magic power to create these illusions. And in the past, he's used that power as part of a shady kind of gang, kind of law firm. And then that gang gets busted by the magic police. And he's given essentially a plea deal where he could either go life in prison, or he can work for the magic police, and then starts his adventures working for the magic police. The woman he gets partnered up with is a very strong magic user. She's very by the book, and I love how their personalities have a little bit of clashing there, and I love their dynamic in these books and how it's really in-depth explored about how he is so willing to stretch the rules and stretch the law. It's okay, it's only a little bit of torture. And she is so rule-following, and then it often creates all of this conflict between them that also leads to internal conflict as they have to work out their own issues in order to mend their relationship over and over. Very gratifying every time. And the reason why it's this series that I have the most love and hope for out of all of the different sub-series is its fundamental structure is every book we're like given a new case for the magic police and then they have to solve it, and alongside it we've got character development. And just like that minimum of having that structure in every book so far is so nice. Where we haven't gotten any books that feel like filler. Every single book has its own plot and action and resolution, and also we have ongoing mysteries and arcs that seem like they're gonna resolve at the season finale or whatever. Also, a thing that this book series is doing pretty well is it's slowly setting up a romance between our 2 leads. I ship it. But it hasn't been so in my face that I'm upset that we haven't gotten any resolution. It's just the hints, and I'm excited for the future books and what they hold here. I gave these books 4 stars, and their book tone is Byzantium Purple. Book tone is a reader personality test. The way it works is the pale colors are the intellectually focused books. The saturated colors are the emotionally focused books. The yellows is atmosphere, the red is plot, and the blue is character focused. So here in Byzantium Purple puts us at emotional, character, plot focused. If you want to learn more about book tone and take the test, I'll link that all in the footnotes for you. Moving on, the next book I read is Balance of Trade. This book, so disappointing. This is a sci-fi book. We are following a young man named Jethry. He's grown up on a trading ship traversing the galaxy. It's time for him to leave the nest and get an internship on another trading ship, and he manages to get an internship with some aliens who are pretty human-like but have slight cultural issues, and then this book is them going around the universe trading and also him learning about their culture and how to integrate with it. And I admit, part of the reason I really didn't like this book is my expectations going in is I thought this was going to be a sci-romance, and it's just a sci-fi, no romance to be seen. And I kept waiting for the romance to show up and it didn't, and that was frustrating. But I think on top of that, I just didn't like the book. Like, it was so boring. Usually I love stories about people learning about each other's culture and the conflict that can grow out of that and the development. But then in this book, there was just no conflict or development. It was just a lot of focus on like him learning the different types of bows that they use and being bad at it and then getting better at it, but that didn't really feel like there was quite consequences for him at any point. It didn't feel like he was actually making connections or enemies because of his cultural misunderstandings throughout this book. It felt very day in the life in the way that's very boring and not cozy, just boring. Like, for example, at some point he goes to a planet and he has to stay there for a while, and this is a big deal for him because he's grown up on spaceships and he's got extreme agoraphobia. He cannot deal with wide open spaces. At least he can't for like 2 chapters. And then all of a sudden it's just resolved and there's like no mention of it again. And I'm like, wait, what? Where did that conflict go? Oh, we're just waving it aside. He's over it now. And so many parts of this book felt just like that, where it would set up something that's so fun and then no, never mind. I would give Balance of Trade 2 stars, and its book tone is chiffon yellow. Next up, I read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I've been trying to read more nonfiction, and this was the pursuit of that. This is a Christian self-help book with a focus on slowing down your life and eliminating distractions and fluff and hurry. Now this falls into a trap that I feel a lot of self-help books do, where at the beginning I'm really on board, where they're establishing the problem, and I'm like, yes, I understand why hurry is so bad and it's inspiring, and yes, I should stop doom scrolling on my phone and overcommitting myself. Yeah, let's do. And then when the self-help book transitions into like actual advice, I'm like, what? You say I should only own 2 shirts and make sure to always stop at stop signs. And I'm like, I don't think this is actually solving the problem that you set up at the beginning. It's also obvious that this author has many soapboxes that spent many diversions and page time that were not very focused or well written, honestly, on things like fast fashion and advertising and minimalism, which is like, it was just annoying and distracting from the message of the book. And it's like, is my main critique of this book about slowing down really that it was too slow? And like, yeah, it is. This book is so short and yet still feels so bloated with so many weird asides and doesn't feel like it has that much actual useful advice in it. Like the principles are good, but like, anyway, it just kind of frustrated me, and by the end I was hoping for it to be over even quicker. But I do really like the beginning, and I like the overall message of this book, and it was readable for the most part, so I'm gonna give it 3 stars. Then I read The Book That Broke the World. So this is a sequel. I absolutely loved, adored, was obsessed with, head over heels for book 1, okay? And then we get to book 2. The setting is all focused around this magical library. The magic of it is that it is functionally infinite, where books are always magically replaced, where you have 1 copy of every book in existence. And in book 1, we're following 2 main protagonists. One is a girl that comes out of poverty and becomes an assistant librarian and rises through the ranks of the library also as she has a coming of age. The other protagonist is Ivar, a man who has been trapped in the library with some of his siblings for generations, and he is desperate to find a way out. And it takes a little while, but eventually their plotlines intersect in really interesting ways. Now, book 1, it really straddled the line well between a book that was really character-focused, where we were following the coming of age of both of our protagonists and really delving into how they felt about everything and their motivations and all of that. And the book also had some nice world-building atmosphere focus, where it was exploring not only the magic of this infinite dimension-hopping library, but also a lot of themes about like the benefits and downsides of infinite knowledge, of how people use that, of how it's used to both lift up people and oppress people. And then we go to book 2. And in book 2, it feels like we dropped the character focus just to do world-building themes focus. And my love was dropped along with that character focus. The characters was why I was loving this book, and the themes were just like a nice garnish, and then the themes became the whole meal, and I hated it. Book 2 adds quite a few more narrators, quite a few more settings, more fantasy races mixed in, more magic, more world building, and more... It feels like everything in this story is being contorted to tell certain thematic stories instead of the stories of these characters. So, The Book That Broke the World, very big disappointment for me. And I know that a lot of people who love book 1 are also going to love this book too, because it does have a lot of the same elements. But if the reason you loved book 1, like me, was because of the characters, book 2, no. So I'd give The Book That Broke the World 2 stars, and its book tone is chiffon yellow. Next up, I read A Drowned Kingdom. This is a epic fantasy novel. It's very dense. It's first person in a very oral storytelling kind of way, especially for like the first part of this book. It's all just the character recounting events, which means that this book doesn't really end up having that many scenes at all, which makes it very hard to get into. Now, I picked this up because I had heard some positive reviews of it, and I had also heard the author talking about it in an interview, where he really wanted to explore like religion and spirituality, both in positive and negative ways, where he wanted to explore sexism and racism and all of that. And I'm like, wow, this book is going to be so interesting. But then once I got into the book, I realized that the lens through which all of these things are being explored is our main character is utterly despicable. The main character is full of religious prejudice and full of sexism and racism and all of these terrible traits, and you're just in his head for the entire book. And that's how it's being explored. And like, I can get on board with a little bit of unlikable main character because I really enjoy watching character arcs. You can start in an unlikable place as long as I see you going to a better place. But this one, The writing style felt so info-dumpy, no scenes, no dialogue for so long, and like I couldn't enjoy the story on any level. I couldn't enjoy it on a plot level because it was so dragging. I couldn't enjoy it on a world building level because it was just confusing info dumps. I couldn't enjoy it on a character level because, come on, the character drove me crazy. And I found that I just couldn't push through this book any longer, so I DNF'd it quite early, around 15%. Now, I read this as part of my patron book club, and that gives me some extra insight on it because I was able to hear some of my patrons who did finish this book, and they say that it does get better. And some of these despicable ideas of the main character are challenged and worked through, at least a little bit. But yeah, it was rough for the book club this month. Better luck to next month, am I right? And this is the book that the book club will be reading next. You can sign up to be part of it through either YouTube memberships or the higher tiers are on Ko-fi memberships. All the links are in the footnotes. Next, I jumped into another nonfiction self-help book because I was trying to find something that would be like the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, but better. So I jumped into Deep Work. And I did like this better than the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. But it also fell in a very similar camp where like, I loved the first half of this book where it was talking about the theory of what deep work is and why it's important. Where it's the idea of having times blocked out where you're really focused. It's the idea of really sorting your work so you can get rid of those tasks that don't actually help anything and really focus in on the important big things. It's the idea of eliminating distractions in your life for both better productivity and fulfillment. And then we got to the second half of this book where it transitioned more into practical applications of these ideas. And some of them were quite practical tips, but quite a lot of them, I was sitting there thinking that this was not applicable to most people. But it just felt like all of these sweeping declarations in the book that like Twitter is always going to be a bad thing and email is always going to be a bad thing and things like that like didn't quite sit right with me. Okay, maybe I'd agree with Twitter always being a bad thing, but not social media in general, you know? But amidst all of the, wow, that is very unhelpful advice, there was some helpful advice, and I feel like I have been able to better apply this to my own work. So I'm going to give Deep Work 4 stars. Then I read a sci-fi romance, Into the Churn. The plot of this book centers around a deadly competition. There's a planet that is in the process of being terraformed, and it has terrible, deadly storms going on, like, pretty much all the time. And the competition it's a race across this planet that also includes some cage fighting matches and stuff. And we are following 2 characters that become contestants and partners in this competition. Our heroine is very determined to compete because she needs the prize money and the publicity. She cares very much about the terraforming on this planet, and the project is slowly losing funds and dying, and she's trying to revitalize it, both for the planet and for her family who works on this terraforming project. Our hero has grown up in the race culture. His mom was a racer, and even though he's lost his passion for it, he's still doing it kind of out of a sense of duty and habit. And then they have to navigate the difficult training for the race together, the publicity, good and bad, that comes with it, and the race itself, which seems to be even more deadly and dangerous than at first glance due to other people and their own evil schemes. And I loved this book. I feel like what it nailed the best was the sense of place and setting that it was able to continuously evoke. Like, when these characters were out in these storms, I felt it. I felt the descriptions of how exhausted they were. I felt the descriptions of how terrible the storm was. Like, that sense of place was so grounding and well done. I also really admired how this book explored especially the character arc of our heroine. Very well done. The romance was passable. I didn't fall in love with it, but they made an okay couple and I enjoyed their romance. I just wish it had been a smidge more difficult for that romance to really happen. It felt a little too easy and without conflict. I gave Into the Churn 4 stars and its book tone is anchor gray. Next, I read The Winter Sea. This is about an author. She's writing a book that is a historical fiction set in Scotland. She journeys to the part of Scotland where her book is set. She settles in. She gets a little bit of a love triangle situation happening with 2 brothers there. And as she's writing, she gets these kind of visions where the book just unfolds before her. And then as she's researching more and more, she realizes that these visions that she's having seem to be 100% historically accurate. And then a good chunk of our page time in this book, about half of it, is the book that she's writing, this historical fiction book, which seems to be historical fact. I think of each of these plot lines, the one that I liked the best was most definitely the present day writer, where for a while she was really off balance, not knowing how real these visions were, how could this be happening, where she's also off balance while she's navigating this love triangle. And there was definitely a lot of intrigue of like, why and how is this happening to her? In the end, I feel like the answers of why and how this is happening to her were kind of underwhelming, but definitely I was invested in her romance plots. Now, in the historical half of this book, we also have a romance going on, but that is where I was not as invested. I think a lot of that was because it took me a while to realize that this was going to be a full half of the book and that I really should be invested in it. I thought it was just giving more context for the present day stuff, but the past stuff is almost more important, where we have a woman who's getting involved in the periphery of these revolutions that are brewing in Scotland with the Jacobites, and she's encountering love and personal tragedies through all of that. And I think because I had so much harder time getting invested in the past story, it did kind of drag down the whole book for me. I did like it all, but I don't think I ever really fell in love with any of it. So I'm going to give The Winter Sea 3 stars, and its book tone is Celadon Green. Now, The Winter Sea was chosen for me to read by one of my patrons. I had each of my patrons submit a name of a book into this TBR jar, and I'm choosing them out at random and reading them. So now that I've finished The Winter Sea, it is time to pick out the next required reading. And if you want to be in on this for the next round, you can sign up to be one of my patrons through either YouTube or Ko-fi. I'm so excited and so nervous. What am I gonna get? So we have, from Juan Pablo, I think you should read Magical Hazmat by 𝐂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐏. I've never heard of this book. That's exciting. Big disclaimer, I haven't read anything from them, so I can't recommend it. But the synopsis looks fun. Please don't be mad if the book isn't good. Nah, I won't be mad. This is fun. So when I review Magical Hazmat, I'll be picking out the next one. I'm excited. This is a fun project. I then read When Among Crows. Now, to be honest, I picked this up almost exclusively based on how beautiful the cover is, but also the genres and the author. The author is Veronica Roth of Divergent fame. I had given her everything from 4 stars to 1 star, so I was excited to see where this one would land. This is a novella that takes place in modern Chicago. Our protagonist is a guy who is on a desperate quest. He wants an audience with the powerful witch Baba Yaga. And in order to find Baba Yaga, he is making deals and schemes and trying to find allies with the various vampires and magical beings in Chicago, most of which are Polish in mythology origin. And throughout this novella, as he picks up 2 more sidekicks, we also get their perspectives. And I loved this book. I love the writing of this, how it's so moody and reflective and poetic. I love how this novella looks at really the inside and inner workings of every single point of view character and gives them an arc and gives them conflict all with each other and with the quest at hand. I love that this novella really gives the balance of we get fun action scenes and intriguing things happening, and then we sit for a while and bandage up the wounds and really have decompression moments where the characters interact with each other and make those fight scenes even more meaningful as they unpack them emotionally. Now, I highly recommend going into this book without reading the blurb, because in my opinion, the blurb is quite spoilery. I didn't read it until after I had finished the book, and I was really glad that I went in with that route, because I feel like the way that this book exposits what's happening very carefully, exactly when you need to know it, is perfect, and knowing things going in only disrupts that delicate, perfect balance that the novella is striking. I especially appreciated the audiobook. We have 3 different narrators for our 3 point of view characters, and it really helped me get into the mood of this story. I want to reread this already, and I think I might this week. So from that glowing review, you might have guessed that I gave this book 5 stars. Now putting Veronica Roth in a very small group of authors that I've both given 5 stars and 1 stars to before, and I can't wait to see what she puts out next. And its book tone is jade green. I then read and just finished yesterday The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, yes, the Grishaverse author, and sometimes there is a book that is so hyped, like this one, that I pick up kind of against my better judgment, and I keep reading against my better judgment, and I read all the way to the end and finish against my better judgment, and I had such a bad time with the entirety of this book, and I'm so mad at myself for not DNFing it sooner. This book I classify mainly as a historical fiction with hints of fantasy. We are following a few people in 1600s Spain. The main one is a scullion maid, and passed down to her through her Jewish heritage, she has gotten a little bit of useful magic. But she has to hide both the magic and her heritage because the Spanish Inquisition is Spanish Inquisitioning, and it's very dangerous to not be a perfect Catholic girl. But then one day, her mistress, Valentina, whose perspective we also get throughout this book, discovers her magic and decides to leverage this magic in order to raise their social standing, to impress their neighbors with these little magical miracles that her maid can do. They attract the attention of another nobleman who is looking for someone who can do magic in order to enter Louisa into this competition that the king is putting on to find a new magician, pretty much. No, but don't get your hopes up too high because the competition is not like high stakes or fast paced or anything. It mostly feels like a few dinners and presentations that are happening. Anyway, but then we also get our third point of view with the magical servant of that nobleman named Santanhel. And he is immortal in a little bit of a vampire-y way, but I would definitely not pitch this as a vampire book. And then throughout the book, as all of these characters are mired in political machinations, they grow and form relationships with each other. And I'm trying to put my finger on like, why is this book so boring? And I think a big part of it is that I didn't really care about any of the characters. I didn't care about the romance that is at the heart of this book. I felt like it was really distracting and boring to constantly be getting the perspective of the noblewoman, where she didn't really add anything to the story. But I think the heart of why this was so boring is it never felt like the stakes were really going anywhere. Like, yes, there's the looming threat of the Spanish Inquisition, but I never really felt like our characters were going to die. Like, or there's like the looming threat of losing the competition or losing your reputation. But like, I never really felt worried for our characters there either. It just felt so like flat and unimportant and uninteresting all the way through. I think my feelings for this book really mirror the way that I feel about the book Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, where like I can look at it and I can appreciate the fairy tale project of it all, because The Familiar really does feel like a fairy tale, but I didn't have fun and I was incredibly bored for most of it. That even though I can appreciate the ending of this book, it was not enough to save the boring hundreds of pages that this book was. So I gave The Familiar 2 stars, and its book tone is jade green. So those are the last 10 books I read. So let me know, do you prefer this format where I'm talking through all the books I read chronologically, or my typical where I'm more ranking the books or playing some sort of game with them? And if you enjoyed watching this video, you're probably interested in watching next another one of my wrap-ups like this one.